I'd like to call to order our special committee on COVID response efficacy for the House. And we will now do the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And we have absences. The following representatives let me know that they would not be able to attend today. So Representative Wheeler and Representative Palmer, as well as Representative Gerard. So we'll note that. And I'd like to, at this point, read our mission statement. This bipartisan committee is tasked with investigating and evaluating the state's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the New Hampshire healthcare system. The committee will function in a science-based fact-finding review, specifically acquiring comprehensive, accurate data and all related information pertaining thereto. Areas of particular focus will include the administration of federal guidance, acceptance of federal funds, and implementation of emergency use authorization vaccination efforts. The committee issued a report documenting their findings and recommendations from public hearings held in 2024. That 2024 report identified additional areas to be investigated, such as the ongoing pandemic responses within the New Hampshire healthcare system. Other areas needing investigation include long COVID treatment, the implementation of the New Hampshire Patient Bill of Rights, and vaccination policies. Follow-up reports will be issued to supplement the original findings and recommendations with additional information. So, at this point, I'd like to request that Representative Polozov further discuss his proposed letter to potentially the governor or various agencies with regard to the COVID vaccine recommendation, the current existing COVID vaccine recommendations, since these are ongoing. So, Representative Polozov, could you please speak to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last time I distributed and delivered copies, additional copies today, request for emergency action on COVID-19 vaccine recommendations. And this is specifically regarding the renewed, so as I said, there was a gap when after reviewing scientific data, New Hampshire stopped recommending COVID-19 vaccines to kids, but then the backlash to federal CDC and renewed ACIP guidance, they switched it to AP schedule, and now they're recommending it again for kids under 2 years old. As I stressed before, like if government has some interest in promoting or recommending certain medical interventions, we would like to see three items. First item, if it's actually needed. So if small kids would be a specific target demographic for the disease in question, that would be a need. And from early on in pandemic, there was scientific data that COVID-19 is affecting elderly people with disabilities, mostly, while kids have very mild or no symptoms at all. So that's the first one. There's no need. Second one is efficacy, whether we're trying to protect kids or whether we're trying to protect elderly by vaccinating kids. And again, now we know that this virus is mutating quickly. Those vaccines don't stop transmission, so efficacy is not there as well. And this could be um, more detailed reviewed. And third one is risk of side effects. Ideally, we want to distribute medications and medical interventions that are safe and not injuring people needlessly. And unfortunately, for this mRNA treatments, it's not the case. The risks of side effects are significant. So the reports of New Hampshire kids who died receiving these treatments, it's on official CDC virus database. And so none of those three basic criteria warrant the current policy. So that's why this request and um, after we reviewed it last week, we have decided that it will be prudent to pair these conclusions of our committee and our work in previous special committee on COVID response efficacy and our current work with some scientific and other statistical data that shows where we're coming from and what the evolving science is showing, constantly showing. So I want to thank Chairman Wei for helping me with this, and you can see on your tables multiple scientific articles that we can review and start reviewing and discussing today, especially in regards of serious side effects. And I would request we would take this request for emergency action in as a emergent item, and let's try and put it together by next meeting, especially given that at the end of June, some of committee members notified us that they will be traveling. I think the next week is a good day, to act on final version. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Representative Polozov. Representative Dory, did you have a comment?
I do. I have a question. We know that this has now been put on the childhood schedule. Am I correct? That they place this on the childhood schedule?
Representative Polozov?
So it's not on schedule of mandated vaccines, but it's on the list of recommended vaccines by Department of Health and Human Services for demographic. I believe it's from, if I'm not mistaken, it's from 8 months to 2-year-old kids specifically, and it's based on national AAP recommendation. I believe it stands for Association of American pediatricians or something to that extent.
Yes, Representative Polizov, if I could ask that you specifically find the source of that recommendation so that we can specifically cite that here, I would request that you find both our New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services recommendation on their webpage and any other kind of supporting information that they may provide, as well as if you could trace that back to the AAP recommendations, the American Association of Pediatricians. That would be, I think, helpful so that we can have all those sources and it also provides, for those people who may not think that this is a concern, they can go back and see if these organizations have any further information about the benefits or risks of taking that if they've posted those. And they can compare them with any references we may ultimately provide in the letter to show that we're trying to take a very balanced approach. We recognize that there are some people who believe that this is has a benefit, but we think, or at least it's the opinion of some members of this committee, that the accumulated evidence that we're now obtaining is leaning in a different direction where the risks outweigh the benefits. And so as part of good informed consent, we would want that to be made known and apparent. Are there any other comments before I proceed to go through the articles? Representative Litchfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, there are a couple items that I'd like to question or clarify, please. In drafting this letter, I'm just looking to find out, I've read the letter and I've listened to what we're saying, but I do have some confusion. Are we looking to discuss with the governor the recommendation of this vaccination for children under the age of 2, or would this be for all children through the age of 18 or 21?
Representative Polizov.
The reason we are discussing children under age of 2 is because current New Hampshire executive branch position is that that's demographics that is recommended to get these shots. My understanding that kids from 2 years to 18 years old currently don't have that recommendation.
Representative Polizov, could you, in your research to observe or to find the sources of that, could you also confirm that there is no recommendation for that age bracket that was brought up by Representative Litchfield?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for bringing that up. Representative Litchfield, follow up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to note that, first of all, within this letter, I really appreciate the fact that it in quotes I put, especially given the frequent mutations of the SARS COVID, it's similar to other coronaviruses. I appreciate that's absolutely on target. There are several mutations, and I do agree that necessitates the need for probably frequent shots throughout the year, and that one may not be helpful. But what I'd like to come back to is on the 4th paragraph. It mentions where substantial scientific evidence indicates that the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines are associated with increased risks of serious conditions in children, including myocarditis, heart inflammation, and stroke. I agree with that. I've seen the research. It's just my perception had been we are seeing this more in, for example, male teens. So is this something that we would want within this letter if it does not particularly relate to children ages 8 months to 2 years? Or if so, maybe there's something I'm missing.
Thank you for that comment. I think uh, there is, so what I see here is we haven't done extensive follow-up of AEs within the demographic that is currently kind of under discussion. And so I think we're pointing out, or I think, again, I don't mean to put words in Representative Polozov's mouth, but I think what we're discussing is the emerging adverse events and side effects that we see coming out generally, and that as a general nature, if these are occurring in the larger population, these would also be a concern uh, in the demographic of administrative concern, or by administrative I mean vaccine administration. Um, so it's a good point, though we should see if there's any particular side effects that we're seeing in the children at the demographic under discussion. However, having said that, we already recognize that in, I can just say, in other studies of current mandated vaccines, the amount of follow-up and monitoring, safety monitoring, is very sparse. It's anywhere from 5 or 6 days post injection to a maximum of approximately 6 months. So it, and some of these types of injuries don't really manifest themselves in that time period of surveillance. So I think it's good mention to cite this, um, and so we should consider um, these side effects that are manifesting themselves in the general population as well, even if they aren't directly pertaining to the age group under discussion. Please, yes, another follow-up?
Yes, thank you. The reason why I bring that up, because I 100% agree with you. Just the way that my mind works, I can be very black and white at times, and I'm sure maybe others can be that way as well. I just don't want someone to take a look at this and say, well, that doesn't pertain to that particular age group. I wonder if there's any way that we could have, I don't know whether it's a separate category or a certain section that's outlined stating, whereas we have seen this happening within this, and this demographic, whether it says down the road or whatever. I'm just wondering if we should separate it in some way, but still yet specify and highlight. Does that make sense? I just don't want anyone to question it and say, right, but we haven't seen that in the 8 month to 2 year old demographic, so why is that here? I'm just wondering if there's a way to.
Right. I think we should be as transparent as possible, and we should do everything we can to delineate those distinctions. So I think those are excellent points. Um, this is again, we'll try and work on this a little bit today, but I think some homework that the committee members will have is to try and improve this as much as possible. And by improve, I mean just refine as much as possible to make those kind of explicit uh, points of distinction as you've done rightly to raise. So, Representative DeRoy.
Thank you. Do you think it would be important for us to cite where we get the information for each one of these within that? And
Yeah.
that way we have it handy.
Yes, yes, thank you. Absolutely. That is exactly what this pile of articles is meant to support. It's that intention is, and this is only, if I can say, this is only the beginning of the research. This is, uh, I have a lot of work to do over the next week, and maybe following if necessary, but we definitely want to be able to support that. If there are other, you'll notice, I'll get into this later, but later in the meeting, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the U.S. Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations and the work that Senator Ron Johnson, the chairman of that committee, is doing. And we introduced last week a particular report that they have issued, but in further research, it turns out they've issued several reports. And so I'd like to introduce those next week. And this is what is kind of unique and different from the 2024 committee, is there was not that much information at the federal level coming out. They have, quite frankly, a lot more resources than we have, but they've been able to do more detailed investigations um, and some of the recent information that they revealed through FOIA requests of the U.S. federal agencies indicates that we said this last week, indicates that there was data being suppressed and not fully brought out. And so that's one of the things that we certainly want the new report or the updated 2026 report to reflect, is there's a better understanding of the data that was suppressed. There's been a lot more studies of either meta-analyses or direct studies. Meta-analyses being usually a study of different data from different populations, and there have also been specific clinical studies showing some other aspects of either efficacy or safety issues. And so I think we can bring a lot of that new information in and bring that into this 2026 report. And I think, as I've stated kind of the last two meetings, I think this puts New Hampshire in an awkward position, because if we're not getting reliable information from the federal government on these matters, what must we do to handle it at the state level? And so I think, again, not to get too ahead of ourselves here, but I think what I see the report is recommending is that if we ever have this pandemic emergency type situation again, we actually need to not only establish some sort of commission to monitor what's being implemented and to review it on an ongoing basis, but we need to direct the scientific agencies within the state to do additional due diligence and research, so that we're not just rubber stamping what the federal government says, but we're actually evaluating whether or not they have properly communicated the risk-benefit ratios in a manner that allows the citizens of New Hampshire to make an informed decision. Yes, Representative Roy.
I'd like to follow up on that. Do we know if they have done anything as far as follow-up?
We do not at this point. I think that's one of the things that eventually we need to. I think what I'd like to do is make arrangements to have people testify in this September, early October timeframe, and invite people. And it was because of the workload that the House had up through really mid-May and even into late May with the committees of conference. We were reviewing quite a large number of bills, and that made availability challenging. I think it's even somewhat challenging for our other committee members who couldn't be here today because of other obligations they have. So I think we'll try and come up in our last June meeting with a kind of September and October schedule. And we'll see if we can invite people in. We might have a couple of weeks where we're doing 2 meetings a week just to try and get some things done. I know I also have some other work commitments on a couple of those weeks, so I know I'll be out of town on one particular week. So we'll see what we can do if Representative Gerard is here and can chair the committee in my absence, then he can do that while I'm gone. Or if not, we'll just do some double up meetings to make sure we get through the amount of data that we need to address.
Thank you.
Yes, Representative Litchfield.
I do want to thank you and the representative for the fact that there is a sense of urgency regarding this letter. And I hope that we're also able to extend that sense of urgency to the governor. And I say that simply because we are in that season now where the children are heading back to school, for example, or preschool, or whether it be daycare in the fall. I'd love to get these recommendations out there as soon as possible, please.
Yes, I think that's recognized by at least everyone present on the committee. I don't want to speak for people who aren't here, but I think that is certainly true, and we will try and again target next week if possible.
Thank you.
All right. Without further ado, then, if it's okay with everyone, I would like to go through some of the articles that I have found that are supportive of some of the conclusions of that. So, let me all right. So, and I'd also like to kind of just go through this. We need to look at, as Representative Polozov said, the first paragraph recommends or discusses what I would call the demographic risk. We probably need information on the type of information that I requested from Representative Polozov to obtain that. We also need to find some articles or supporting evidence that says that demographic is not significantly impacted by COVID-19. Currently, I think we're aware of that based upon our general understanding and research, but we need to find an article that supports that. And so that's sort of where we are with the first paragraph. The second paragraph talks about efficacy, and I'll just read it here. Whereas current COVID-19 mRNA vaccines demonstrate limited to slightly negative efficacy in preventing transmission of the virus and reducing symptomatic infection, especially given the frequent mutations of SARS-CoV-2 similar to other coronaviruses. So that really addresses the efficacy in terms of preventing transmission of the virus and whether it would reduce symptoms associated with it. Now, I have seen articles that talk to this. I don't have any of those here today, but that is something else. Is do the vaccines prevent transmission, or are they really reducing symptomatic infection? So, and that's, so if we're going to make those sorts of statements, we should have some information that backs that up. Now, my focus was really on sort of the next 3 paragraphs that talk about the side effects. And Um, let me first address, I think it might be easiest to address the paragraph that discusses the potential um, cancer risk first. And so I have several articles that talk about that. So let me talk about that. All right, so we have a total of 7 articles, and 5 of these directly discuss different elements of potential cancer risk. So let me first read the proposed paragraph, and then I'll introduce these different articles that talk about this. So, whereas messenger RNA COVID-19 vaccines have been shown to exhibit multiple potentially carcinogenic effects, carcinogenic, of course, meaning causing cancer, including the presence of SV40 promoter slash enhancer sequence, contamination with residual DNA fragments, and the ability of mRNA and related components to distribute systemically and potentially integrate into cellular genetic material. So there's a lot in there. There's like 5 different elements. Each element should be supported. Um, I'd like to really first address the carcinogenic effects, and then there are the other information about the sequence and the DNA fragments and other related components. We should definitely get additional uh, scientific information and articles that clarify where that sort of statement is coming from.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure we're here.
Yes, we're almost there.
Okay, so we're not reading from the sheet.
We're not reading from that yet. We're still talking. So
Okay,
that
thank you.
I'm reading from the proposed communication here, and so now let me talk about the carcinogenic effects. So here are a series of 5 articles. This is from the magazine called Biomarker Research. This is a 2025 article, so again, something that was not available to the 2024 committee, and it's entitled "1 Year Risks of Cancer Associated with COVID-19 Vaccination: A Large Population-Based Cohort Study in South Korea." So I'll just read from the abstract. That's probably the easiest way. In these scientific articles, an abstract is basically a summary of the article. So I'll just read that. So the oncogenic potential, so cancer-causing oncogenic potential of SARS-CoV-2 has been hypothetically proposed, but real-world data on COVID-19 infection and vaccination are insufficient. Therefore, this large-scale population-based retrospective study in Seoul, South Korea, aimed to establish the cumulative incidence and the subsequent risks of overall cancers 1 year after COVID-19 vaccination. Data from 8,407,849 individuals between 2021 and 2023 were obtained from the Korean National Health Insurance Database. The participants were categorized into 2 groups based on their COVID-19 vaccination status. The risk for overall cancers were assessed using multivariable Cox proportional hazard models, and data was expressed as hazard ratios, HRs, and 95% confidence intervals, CIs. The hazard ratios of thyroid, gastric, colorectal, lung, breast, and prostate cancers significantly increased at 1 year post-vaccination. In terms of vaccine type, cDNA vaccines were associated with the increased risk of thyroid, gastric, colorectal, lung, and prostate cancers. Messenger RNA vaccines were linked to the increased risk of thyroid, colorectal, lung, and breast cancers. Heterologous vaccination was related to, make sure I have the right spot here, were related to the increased risk of thyroid and breast cancers. Given the observed associations between COVID-19 vaccination and cancer incidence by age, sex, and vaccine type, further research is needed to determine whether specific vaccination strategies may be optimal for populations in need of COVID-19 vaccination. I would interpret the last sentence as saying that really a better understanding of the risk-benefit ratio needs to be addressed, and whether or not the risk for cancer in these type cases has caused the risk to be greater than the benefits obtained from the COVID vaccine. I also read their last paragraph. In conclusion, COVID-19 vaccination could be associated with an increased risk of 6 specific cancer types, including thyroid, gastric, colorectal, lung, breast, and prostate cancers. Notably, this COVID-19 vaccination associated cancer risk was likely more elevated among individuals aged less than or equal to 65 years, except in individuals with prostate cancer. Given the observed associations between COVID-19 vaccination and cancer incidence by age, sex, and vaccine type, further research is needed to determine whether specific vaccination strategies may be optimal for populations in need of COVID-19 vaccination. So that's the first article. Certainly a very large study with millions of individuals being analyzed, and that gives us, I think, an indication that there are certainly an increased risk of cancer in certain population types, in South Korea anyway. And so there's one particular study for that. The next article which I'd like to present is from it's from the XCLI journal. I'm sorry, I do not know what XCLI stands for, but it's EXCLI journal. This is from 2025 and was published on July 1st of 2025. The title of the article is COVID-19 Vaccination All-Cause Mortality and Hospitalization for Cancer, a 30-month cohort study in an Italian province. So, and this comes out of the University of Bologna, Italy. I'm probably mispronouncing that, so I apologize to that city for that mispronunciation. But let me just read the abstract. Anecdotal reports suggest an association between SARS-CoV-2 vaccination and some cancers, but no formal assessment has been published. A lot of these, this is just a comment, a lot of these studies were only being done in 2025, hence the articles are from the 2025 time period and afterwards. So it had really not been studied, and also the lag time in the development of cancer would have also contributed to this. So those might have been factors involved in this. So continuing with reading of the abstract, starting at the second sentence now. This population-wide cohort analysis was aimed at evaluating the risk of all-cause death and cancer hospitalization by SARS-CoV-2 immunization status. Using National Health System official data, the entire population of the Pescara province, Italy, was followed from June 2021, 6 months after the first vaccination, to December 2023. Cox models, or COX models, were adjusted for age, gender, previous SARS-CoV-2 infection, and selected comorbidities. Of the 296,015 residents aged greater than or equal to 11 years, 16.6% were unvaccinated. 83.3% received greater than one dose, and 62.2% received greater than 3 doses. Compared with the unvaccinated, those receiving greater than one dose showed a significantly lower likelihood of all-cause death and a slightly higher likelihood of hospitalization for cancer. There's also some statistics embedded in there. I'm not going to read those, but it's, again, the hazard report that was mentioned in the hazard ratio that was mentioned in the previous article and the confidence interval. Hazard ratio is being one form of assessment, and the confidence interval being a statistical assessment. So continuing reading here, the latter association was significant only among the subjects with no previous SARS-CoV-2 infection and was reversed when the minimum time between vaccination and cancer hospitalization was set to 12 months. The subjects who received SARS-CoV-2 vaccination showed a substantial reduction in all-cause mortality. So that's a good benefit, if I can comment there, and a risk of cancer hospitalization that varied by infection status, cancer site, and the minimum lag time after vaccination. Given that it was not possible to quantify the potential impact of the healthy vaccinee bias and unmeasured confounders, these findings are inevitably preliminary. So they're finding, basically they're finding some relationships. There was a perceived benefit in the reduction in all-cause mortality. And so I want to just now turn to it's listed as page 701 in the article. I'm just turning to the conclusion. The subjects who received SARS-CoV-2 vaccination showed almost half the risk of all-cause death after a median follow-up of 25 months. We also observed an inconstant association between COVID-19 vaccination and cancer hospitalization, depending upon infection status, cancer site, and the minimum lag time between vaccination and cancer. As the results might be influenced by the confounding effect of differential healthcare utilization by vaccinated individuals, they must be considered preliminary, and further data are definitely required to elucidate the potential association between cancer and COVID-19 vaccination. So there's some signals there, but the authors are to some degree unwilling to go further on that, maybe mainly because they probably feel they need more information. So, and let's see if I just want to check quickly if they did look at the following types of cancer. So colorectal, lung, breast, uterine, ovarian, prostate, bladder, thyroid, and hematological blood. So those were the types of cancers that they looked at. All right. And then the next one that I want to look at is, I'll try and look at, this one is from the International Journal of Innovative Research in Medical Science from October 2025, Volume 10, Issue 10. This is a case report, and it's entitled "The Genomic Integration and Molecular Dysregulation in Aggressive Stage 4 Bladder Cancer Following COVID-19 Messenger RNA Vaccination." And the abstract has background, case findings, and conclusions. And this is a a case study. So by a case study, it is one particular individual. So certainly not a wide demographic signal, but something worth noting. So I'll just read from the abstract. The background: bladder cancer is rare in young women, and advanced presentations are exceptionally uncommon. We, the authors, report a de-identified case of a previously healthy 31-year-old female who developed rapidly progressive stage 4 bladder cancer within 12 months of completing a 3-dose Moderna mRNA vaccination series, having received those shots in May, June, and December of 2021. The case findings are: comprehensive multi-omic profiling was performed using PBIMA, molecular surveillance and individualized targeted immunotherapy peptide editing, and REVIS, a spike-associated transcriptional translational instability surveillance. So incorporating analysis of plasma-derived circulating tumor DNA, whole blood RNA, and urine exosome proteomics. Period. I believe that's the end of the sentence. So dysregulated gene expressions were identified across oncogenic driver genes. They list a number of genes here, a series of 7. Auxiliary tumor promoting signals, they list 3 of those, and broad evidence of genome instability with impaired DNA repair, and they list 2 of those. Within circulating tumor DNA, a host vector chimeric red mapped to various chromosomes. They list them there. In, again, they really tell, the next sentence really tells the location of those in a well-identified, I'm not going to read all of that, but in a zinc finger ZNF gene cluster. So it's a specific gene cluster within DNA. This sequence aligned with perfect 2020 identity to a segment with the spike open reading frame, so ORF coding region. So if I can paraphrase what that means, is that they found the spike protein DNA or genetic material in that tumor. Hence, this is why they can make or why they're making the conclusions that they are. So they also found that ironically, they found Pfizer DNA plasmid material, despite the patient only receiving Moderna vaccination. So this apparent paradox is best explained by shared spike ORF sequences within the expression cassette across both vaccine platforms. Because Moderna has not disposited its proprietary plasmid sequence in NCP1, BLAST defaults to Pfizer's published reference as the nearest available match. So Moderna has not shared some proprietary information, or what they consider to be proprietary information. Pfizer has, so the nearest match that the testing determines is it matches to some extent what Pfizer has. So it doesn't mean that it's Pfizer vaccine, it's just that the match is equivalent. And why is the match important? Because the match is a matchup to spike protein. So the integration site was located outside the canonical AAVS1 safe harbor and within a gene-dense or combination-prone regulatory region, raising concern for transcriptional disruption, fusion transcript formation, and oncogenic potential. So really, basically, hijacking of gene replication capabilities, and which is how tumors grow and things like that. So the probability of a random 20-base sequence perfectly matching a predefined target is approximately 1 in a trillion, making this alignment statistically compelling and highly unlikely to be an incidental artifact. So the conclusion is that, or the what that sentence means is that statistically speaking, this the tumor DNA having matches with spike protein DNA are it's nearly impossible for that to be a random thing that occurred. It has to um, um, it there has to be a causal relationship between the two is what I think that means. So continuing on with this abstract, the conclusion then reads, this sentinel case reports the first documented evidence of genomic integration of mRNA vaccine-derived genetic material in a human subject, documenting a temporal association between COVID-19 mRNA vaccination and aggressive malignancy, reproducible multi-omic evidence of oncogenic signaling, and a non-safe harbor host vector integration event. While causality cannot be established from a single case, and that's important to note, the convergence of 1, close temporal proximity to vaccination, 2, genomic integration of vaccine plasmid-derived spike gene fragments, and 3, consistent transcriptomic and proteomic instability across biospecimens represents a highly unusual and biologically plausible pattern. These findings highlight an urgent need for systemic genomic surveillance, orthogonal validation with long-read sequencing, and larger cohort studies to rigorously define the impact of synthetic mRNA vaccine platforms on genome integrity and cancer risk. So basically, if I can try and translate some of that, again, I'm not um, a science doctor by any stretch of the imagination here, but having participated in some, or not as a participant, but having overseen from a regulatory quality perspective some cancer studies, um, they're talking about basically some material from the vaccine getting into the system, the body, and then having a manifest presence of the spike protein in the tumor itself. So, with the potential conclusion that the spike protein contributed to the tumor. Um, Again, those are, as the authors say, this represents a singular case. It's not a indication of any trend, but it certainly shows that some this has occurred in at least one person, and it's worth following up and noting in other people. All right, the next study that I'd like to introduce is from the World Journal of Experimental Medicine. This is published late last year in 2025, December 20th, and is, let's see if I can, I think it's volume 15, issue 4, if I'm reading the coding correctly there. And the title of this article is Synthetic Messenger RNA Vaccines and Transcriptomic Dysregulation, Evidence from New Onset Adverse Events in Cancers Post-Vaccination. So again, they're looking at evidence that they've seen more recently and that perhaps was not available earlier. They have a rather long, they have an abstract. It's composed of a background, the aim of the study, the methods that they use, the results, and the conclusions. Let me just read those real quickly for introducing the article. The background is that synthetic messenger RNA, or mRNA, vaccines have raised concerns regarding prolonged spike protein expression, immune activation, and potential off-target effects. The aim of the study is to investigate transcriptomic alterations in individuals with new onset adverse events or cancer following messenger RNA coronavirus disease 2019 vaccination. Methods. Bulk RNA sequencing was performed on peripheral blood from two patient groups. 1. Individuals with new onset non-malignant adverse events, so people not having cancer, and 2. Individuals newly diagnosed with cancer post-vaccination. A control group of normal individuals was used for comparison. Differential gene expression was analyzed using DE-seq2 and gene set enrichment analysis, was conducted using MSigDB database and custom gene sets. And then the results. Both vaccine patient groups displayed widespread transcriptional dysregulation. In the non-malignant adverse event group, hallmark enrichments included mitochondrial dysfunction, proteasome-mediated stress, transcriptomic instability, and systemic inflammation. The cancer group exhibited additional hallmarks of genomic instability and epigenetic reprogramming. Nonsense-mediated decay that when it says nonsense, that I believe that's a specific reference to a gene sequence. It may sound like it's a funny term to see there, but nonsense-mediated decay, ribosomal stress, and myelocytomatosis, oncogene activation were prominent in both groups, while immune signaling via toll-like receptors and type 1 interferons were particularly elevated in cancer patients. The observed transcriptomic profiles indicate cellular stress responses, mitochondrial dysfunction, and immune dysregulation following exposure to mRNA vaccines, potentially in susceptible individuals. The conclusion: shared and distinct molecular signatures in both cohorts, meaning both study groups, a cohort is a study group or a group within a study, demonstrate underlying mechanisms contributing to post-vaccine symptomatology and complications, including oncogenesis or progression of malignant disease. These findings underscore the need for a deeper investigation into the long-term safety of messenger RNA vaccines and host response variability. So, we've now been through 4 of the 5 articles, and all of them are calling for additional studies being warranted, and certainly the number of cancers that they're citing, and certainly in some demographics, an elevation in the number of incidents of cancers does raise cause for alarm. I have a 5th article. I'm going to take a sip of coffee first here. Yes, Representative Polozov.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to thank you for this collection. And there were a lot of discussions in terms of, like, from early on, we saw safety signals in virus database. We saw safety signals in vSafe dataset when 10 million willing participants who wanted this vaccine, who believed in it, and they were reporting the side effects to government. That dataset from early on showed that these vaccines give so many severe side effects, but the question is, like, what's causing it? It's still being discussed. There could be a different scientific explanation of it. Here we are very concerned about mRNA technology because it's like, I believe it's the first time in history when it was distribute to people on mass scale, but now the discussion, they want to put it in flu vaccine, they wanted to put it in our food chain through vaccines to livestock, fish, or whatever. But the first article you shared, it's interesting because it's from South Korea, and they use the same mRNA, the same mRNA technology that we use, but they also use cDNA COVID-19 vaccines. I believe it's in this case it means conventional DNA, like based on adenovirus. So it's like the idea is the same, like genetic material to be delivered to patient cells to start producing spike protein and hopefully create antibody response to it and certain hopefully immunity. But the vector is different. So what's interesting is that profile of cancers is slightly different from the list on that article, but both mRNA technology and cDNA vaccines caused increased risk of cancers. So for me, it's it shows like that making our body producing spike protein might not be a good idea, and there are some coming back to myocarditis and different dysregulations of blood system. There's some data about COVID-19 spike protein being toxic to heart tissue and some other data. So just wanted to note this interesting fact that in the US we don't use that AstraZeneca conventional DNA vaccines, and actually, as far as I know, South Korea is also like rolling it back, switching more to mRNA side. But it's interesting that this article looked into both of them.
Yes, there's a couple of things that you mentioned there is immunity comes through a couple of different kind of vectors. There's kind of the antibody response. Back when AIDS and HIV were first coming out, people primarily talked about immunity being involving antibody response. But what a number of researchers at that time found out was they started to understand the capabilities that T cells in the body have for providing immunity. And so a lot of research was done in I want to say the late 80s and the 90s and since then on T cell immunity or immunity related to T cells, which operates under a different mechanism. And so I think the body is tremendously complex, and so there are all these different pathways are very interesting ways, and it would be interesting to know. There are a number of individuals who either had COVID but no vaccine, or never got COVID, and because they were but they were still exposed, so their immune system worked in those cases. It would be good to understand how that happened and what was that, and if there's a way we could achieve that, that would be not only efficacious, not only safe, but also cost effective for New Hampshire. So I think that's important because I don't know about the rest of you, but I hear constituents concerned about the cost of healthcare as well as other things. So while I don't think that's the primary thing that we're looking at, I think that's something to consider as well. And so um, I know I have seen some articles on those, and perhaps we'll introduce some of those articles later. Um, any other comments before I continue on this fifth article on cancer? All right, then let me continue here. This article is from OncoTarget from 2026. It was published early this year, January 3rd, in that magazine, OncoTarget, or perhaps a website, www.oncotarget.com. And it states COVID vaccination post-infection cancer signals, evaluating patterns and potential biological mechanisms. Then I'll just read the abstract. It is it's like a 29-page report. The abstract states, a growing number of peer-reviewed publications have reported diverse cancer types appearing in temporal association with COVID-19 vaccination or infection. To characterize the nature and scope of these reports, a systemic literature search from January 2020 to October 2025 was conducted based on specific eligibility criteria. A total of 69 publications met the inclusion criteria. 66 article-level reports describing 333 patients across 27 countries, as well as 2 retrospective population-level investigations, Italy and Korea, actually the 2 articles that we've read before, which is kind of why I read those first. This quantified cancer incidence and mortality trends among vaccinated populations, and 1 longitudinal analysis of 1.3 million U.S. military service members spanning the pre-pandemic through post-pandemic periods. Most of the studies documented hematological malignancies, non-Hodgkin's lymphomas, cutaneous lymphomas, and leukemias, solid tumors, breast, lung, melanoma, sarcoma, pancreatic cancer, and glioblastomas, and virus-associated cancers, Kaposi and Merkel cell carcinomas. Across reports, several recurrent themes emerged. 1. Unusually rapid progression, the turbo cancers that we've heard about. Unusually rapid progression, recurrence, or reactivation of pre-existing indolent or controlled diseases. 2. Atypical or localized histopathological findings, including involvement of vaccine injection sites or regional lymph nodes. And 3. Proposed immunologic links between acute infection or vaccination and tumor dormancy, immune escape, or microenvironmental shifts. The predominance of case-level observations and early population-level data demonstrates an early phase of potential safety signal detection. These findings underscore the need for rigorous epidemiological, longitudinal, clinical, histopathological, forensic, and mechanistic studies to assess whether and under what conditions COVID-19 vaccination or infection may be linked to cancer. So again, another article that says additional research needs to be done. Let me see if they have a particular conclusion that's worth reading here. Oh, it's quite long.
It shows the back, it's long enough.
Yeah, so on page 19. All right, I'll go ahead and read this. The collective worldwide evidence from 2020 to 2025 underscores a biologically plausible connection between COVID-19 vaccination and cancer. The recurring clinical findings documented across many reports of de novo cancer onset, so new de novo, cancer onset, rapid tumor progression, turbo cancers, or viral reactivation and reawakening of dormant disease highlight critical gaps in knowledge and understanding of how large-scale immune changes produced by the vaccine interacts with cancer biology. Both SARS-CoV-2 infection and COVID-19 vaccination engage overlapping biological pathways that could, in principle, influence cancer risk, yet they differ in mechanism, magnitude, biodistribution, and duration of their effects. Shared mechanisms include activation of the innate immune system, robust interferon signaling, cytokine induction, oxidative stress, and transient disruption of immune cell homeostasis. These changes can theoretically expose latent malignancies, promote clonal expansion of pre-existent mutant cells, or create microenvironmental contexts permissive to tumor progression. In addition, both infection and vaccination induce spike protein expressions, which interact with ACE2 expressing tissues and can trigger endothelial activation, inflammation, and cellular stress pathways implicated in oncogenic signaling. Both can also lead to prolonged inflammatory and tissue injury states, all of which could be contributing to genomic instability, epigenetic remodeling, and chronic immune dysregulation. However, unique mechanisms distinguish COVID-19 vaccination from natural infection. Vaccination involves widespread biodistribution, intracellular uptake, and persistence of modified nucleic acid templates that drive synthesis of an unnatural spike protein both at the injection site but also throughout the body. The presence of the residual or fragmented DNA combined with the LNP-mediated delivery to immune and non-immune tissues, and sustained spike expression for months to years represent vaccine-specific factors that could theoretically promote insertional mutagenesis, so meaning the DNA or RNA inserts itself and causes a mutation. Continuing, perturb immune surveillance or accelerate growth of pre-existing malignant clones. So cancer cells that are existing. As such, there is much to be learned from human tissue and blood samples as well as autopsies to better understand the interplay between COVID infection, vaccination, and other cancer mechanisms. To this end, spike protein presence and persistence along with biological effects that are cell autonomous or that depend on host immune interactions need to be studied to establish connections to cancer initiation and progression. Accordingly, we propose that tumors arising after documented SARS-CoV-2 infection or following COVID-19 vaccination be evaluated using a standard immunohistochemical classification framework. So just if I can comment, when these things occur, we need to classify them in a certain way so that they can be better tracked statistically and better understood. Continuing. At minimum, this should include assessment of the viral antigen expression patterns by IHC, spike positive, nucleocapsid positive, spike positive, nucleocapsid negative, and spike negative, nucleocapsid negative phenotype should be defined. This assessment should be integrated with detailed characterizations of proliferative activity, Ki-67, and cell death and DNA damage response markers, tumor suppressor or oncogene pathway signatures, and the immune tumor microenvironment. Implementing this type of reporting across clinical pathology and autopsy evaluations would allow more precise discrimination among tumors potentially driven by infection, by vaccine-related antigen expression, or by unrelated oncogenic processes, and would enable aggregation of comparable cases across institutions. Stopping for a moment to comment that part of the problem is that relatively, while our healthcare systems are are much more centralized than they used to be, they're relatively decentralized, and there's no way of sharing this information. So there's no way to efficiently establish a trend across a demographic or a larger population because the details behind these tumors are not being captured in a way that would facilitate that. So continuing with the reading of this. So establishing uniform criteria of this kind is essential for building a coherent evidence base, supporting mechanistic research, and ultimately determining whether observed associations reflect coincidence, unmasking of latent disease, immune perturbation, or true causal relationships. So basically, they're saying there's some indications, but we don't have definitive proof of causal relationship. But there are some suspicions of that. So, continuing, establishing causality between SARS-CoV-2 infection, that's the virus itself, or COVID-19 vaccination, those are the vaccines obviously, and cancer requires a level of evidence far beyond temporal association. So just the minor statistics about whether you have a shot or not and whether you have cancer or not are not sufficient to drive a true understanding of the situation. In oncology, causation is never determined by a single observation or study. It emerges only when multiple independent lines of evidence converge over time, which is exactly what the last article was talking about, and needing, in that case study, they needed to find more definitive proof to show that it was a trend across the population. Continuing, in oncology, causation, or I read that already, excuse me. This includes mechanistic data such as genomic integration analyses, clonal evolution trajectories, immune profiling, and epigenetic changes. Pathology-based findings, including autopsies with molecular characterization, experimental models that accurately reflect human tissue biology, organoids, humanoid systems, long-read sequencing of exposed tissues, and population-level epidemiologic studies capable of detecting small but meaningful signals across background incidents. Only by integrating these approaches can we distinguish coincidence from unmasking of latent disease, expansion of pre-existing malignant clones, and true de novo oncogenesis. Importantly, the need for rigorous evidence should not be used to dismiss emerging patterns. So, the last sentence I think is important for this committee to understand is that even though we don't have all the details yet, because in fact we do have these patterns that seem to be emerging, it still is urgent for us to make note of those and, as appropriate, take action to recognize these patterns and then to see what could be done to prevent them as necessary. Continuing, two more paragraphs here, one long one and one short one. Transparent discussion of biologically plausible mechanisms and surveillance strategies is essential to determine if this temporal association is causally linked. Current reliable epidemiologic data is lacking to provide evidence that vaccination does not increase population-level cancer incidence. Peer-reviewed literature is not completely or easily indexed. Establishing a framework for post-vaccination cancer surveillance could help detect rare adverse patterns early and enable mechanism follow-up without compromising public confidence. If I can stop for a moment, that should be something that we have in New Hampshire the next time there's a pandemic. We should immediately implement that. So that is something that this committee could specifically recommend that we do at a state level. So if someone would take note of that particular sentence that starts with establishing, I think that would be a good recommendation for the committee in our next report. The goal of this review, continuing, the goal of this review is not to estimate population level cancer risk, but to provide a structured synthesis of existing peer-reviewed literature, identify recurring clinical and biological themes, and delineate critical gaps that require rigorous epidemiologic and mechanistic follow-up. This would enable a better understanding of the full spectrum of immune responses to inform safer immunization strategies and illuminate previously underappreciated links between immunity and cancer biology. Last paragraph. The scientific imperative moving forward should be a coordinated framework combining longitudinal surveillance and mechanistic experimentation to allow us to distinguish coincidence from causality and to refine for future vaccine platforms accordingly. In doing so, we stand to gain not only a clearer understanding of the vaccine safety, but also a deeper insight into the fundamental links between immunity, infection, and cancer emergence. So, considering the cost of cancer healthcare right now and treatments, certainly that's a notable and worthwhile study to do. And we hope that the healthcare industries do that. Representative Polozov.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very interesting review article, and thank you for introducing it. I want to make a couple of comments on this. At the end of the article, at the very end, they focus on some uncertainty. Sometimes we don't know if it happened after vaccine, if it happened because of vaccine. But because they review so many articles, I would like us to focus more of what we know for sure, and some of it you may find if you read through this article. So from my brief review of it, if you go to page 14, line 4, for example, it provides that two scientific articles showed the COVID-19 mRNA vaccines produce spike protein that is encoded by a stable mRNA and has been found to be long-lived in the human body. So that its original idea was like that it will be short-lived, that we will just inject it in a small like area of your muscle. It will be produced there, produce immune reaction, and be gone. So scientific data show it's not the case. And if you go to
Before you continue on, if I may just make a quick comment here, just a few sentences down from that is an important understanding. So it says, despite this, there are efforts by the EU, European Union, to modify the definition of gene therapy to exempt mRNA vaccines from this category. So it's important for people to understand, and for anyone who may be watching this, is that at least under the current European Union definitions, mRNA vaccines cause the same effect as gene therapy. And meaning they alter the genes in ways that they alter the genes. That is just a simple statement. So I've not looked recently into the US FDA definitions or the CDC definitions for gene therapy, but it would be interesting to see if similar things have occurred. I would also, before you continue with your next point, like to point out that all of these references that they have identified here supporting their information are provided, and so it would be good to for us to pull those documents up and to if they provide more detailed and more direct information, to utilize those in addition to what we've already established. So we should probably coordinate about that, and time permitting, we'll do some of that today. But I think it would be a good idea to start to go through. My goal is to read these articles several times. It takes several times to read the articles to go through and kind of understand all the terminology. I'm familiar with a lot of it, but there's some of it that I'm less familiar with. And it would be good to go through the articles, understand them thoroughly, and then go through and see what supporting evidence they have in the references that may give us more direct information. So you raised an excellent point, and I just thought since we were in that same paragraph, I would comment on that. So please continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to be realistic what we can do timeline. So I would suggest like we have a good literature already for the next week for this request for emergency action, but we will have more time for our October final report, so we will be able to elaborate more scientific data for that time. So if you go to next one, page 16, starting with spike protein biology, page 16, spike protein biology, it goes deeper into the same topic. So the last paragraph on the bottom starts with the spike protein. The spike protein produced by the vaccines has been reported to persist for weeks, months, and even years. And they list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 scientific papers that found that spike protein persists in body after vaccination, providing potential long-term activity in cells. Moreover, the stabilized spike protein produced by the COVID vaccines, spike 2P, differs from the natural protein in SARS-CoV-2 as it contains two proline substitutions, and at least those numbers, that enable stabilization. Again, like this toxic protein persists in bodies for long after vaccination, and that's a major concern both for cancer and other side effects. And if we go to the next chapter, also page 16, DNA contaminants. I mentioned it in my request draft. So let's see. If you go to the bottom, so
Yes,
where it says the quantity. The quantity of residual DNA reported in several independent assessments exceeds recognized limits for naked DNA. And the size distribution of DNA fragments when combined with enhanced transfection efficiency due to LNPs raised the possibility of genomic insertion. In addition, because SV40 regulatory elements are present in the BNT2B vaccine impurities, they cite an article for that. When inserted into genome, this DNA can alter the expression of adjacent sequences and or normal gene regulation and increases tumorigenic potential. So this is SV40 promoter enhances sequence that I mentioned. That it is widely discussed and widely concerned that this could contribute to pro-cancer effects that we are seeing.
Yes, I think you have the article, this article and the ones it cites in this paragraph support that particular paragraph that we're under discussion. So I think that's good. We have some good evidence for that. Representative Roy.
Yes, I'm curious as to why we don't see references to Dr. Cole. And we all know who Dr. Cole is. He was the original individual who was testing all of these tumors that were coming. He's a cancer. I guess they call him I'm not sure what his formal title is, but I would think that we would want to take and look and see if we can't find some papers that he has written, because he's done extensive work in this.
I volunteer you to do that.
I shall.
All right, excellent. Good. Any other comments before we? Yes, Representative Polozov.
I just want to comment that there are different levels of scientific data, if we could say, and like one of the problems that we reviewed in our first special committee is that there was a lot of censorship that included difficulty that doctors and scientists experienced with publishing their drafts through official peer-reviewed journals. So I'm happy that Chairman Larry was able to find these scientific materials, but some of the original data unfortunately never made it into peer-reviewed journals.
Yes, thank you, Representative Polozov. I think that is actually something that we should note in this letter, that the U.S. Senate has found that federal agencies. I think it's important that we note that it was the federal agencies who were suppressing the data, not our own state agencies. And I believe the state agencies were operating with the best of intentions, with the knowledge that they had, but it's pretty obvious from Senator Johnson's report that data was being suppressed. So we should discuss that, and I think that's there's two factors. One, we know data was suppressed and safety data was suppressed specifically so that we do not know the full impact of the safety because that data was suppressed. And then the second thing is that this is now coming out. This is something that we will need to monitor, and I think we have to put in, even in the October 2026 report that this committee will issue. I still don't think this is not pressing for another special committee, believe me, but this is simply pointing out that all the data that's coming out is not the end of the story, and we will not reach the end of the data in October 26 by any stretch of the imagination. There is still much to come out, and we will have to understand that more. We as a state and as representatives will need to be aware of that and monitor that and make sure that our state agencies are paying attention to this sort of information. So, all right. So, I think there's certainly a lot of information there. I think those articles should provide more than sufficient references for that one cancer paragraph, although I do think some of the particular articles and references that were noted within those articles that Representative Polozov mentioned, we should also bring those forward and include those as to help substantiate our request here. So I do have the one paragraph says, whereas substantial scientific evidence indicates that messenger RNA COVID-19 vaccines are associated with increased risk of serious conditions in children, including myocarditis, heart inflammation, and stroke. So I do have one article that speaks to that. And so let me just, this actually dates back to 2022. So I'm wondering if there aren't, in fact, updates to this article or other articles that talk about this. So I think there's still some additional research to do, but and I don't want to take quite as long on this article as I did on the first five, but this article is from something called Curious, so Cureus. Was published in August 11th of 2022, and it's entitled Catecholamines are the key trigger of COVID-19 mRNA vaccine-induced myocarditis, a compelling hypothesis supported by epidemiological, anatomopathological, molecular, and physiological findings. And so I'll just read the abstract very quickly. I may just read the first and third paragraph, and maybe some selected portions of this. Well, we'll see. So, several acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2 or SARS-CoV-2, mRNA vaccine-induced myocarditis is a rare but well-documented complication in young males, the point that Representative Litchfield was making earlier. The increased incidence of sudden death among athletes following vaccination has been reported and requires further investigation. Whether the risk of myocarditis, a known major cause of sudden death in young male athletes, also increases after coronavirus disease, COVID-19, infection is unknown. The severity and implications of these critical adverse events require a thorough analysis to elucidate their key triggering mechanisms. The present review aimed to evaluate whether there was justification to hypothesize that catecholamines in a hypercatecholaminergic state are the key trigger of SARS-CoV-2 mRNA vaccine-induced myocarditis and related outcomes, and whether similar risks are also present following COVID-19 infection. Just stop as a comment here. I had people tell me at various points when I raised the questions about myocarditis being caused by the vaccines. There was a immediate refutation that no, this was absolutely caused by the virus and not by the vaccines themselves. But although I think the data supports the opposite, but people either through social media or discussions amongst themselves had come to the opposite conclusion from what the data provided. So a thorough structured scoping review of the literature was performed to build the hypothesis through three pillars. So detection of myocarditis risk, potential alterations and abnormalities identified after the SARS-CoV-2 mRNA vaccination or COVID infection, and consequent events, and the third element, physiological characteristics of the most affected population. So what demographic was most affected? So the following terms were searched. They go through a number of terms, which I will not read. Then skipping down, the rationale and data that supported the hypothesis were as follows. The SARS-CoV-2 mRNA vaccine-induced myocarditis primarily affected young males, while the risk was not observed following COVID-19 infection. Independent autopsies or biopsies of patients who presented post-SARS-CoV-2 mRNA vaccine myocarditis in different geographical regions enabled the conclusion that a primary hypercatecholaminergic state was the key trigger of these events. SARS-CoV-2 mRNA was densely present, and SARS-CoV-2 spike protein was progressively produced in adrenal medulla chromaffin cells, which are responsible for catecholamine production. So a certain mechanism within the body was producing that. The spike protein apparently either targeted or was found in that mechanism, and therefore that's where they found this production here. The dihydroxyphenylamine decarboxylase enzyme that converts dopamine into noradrenaline was overexpressed in the presence of SARS-CoV-2, leading to an enhanced non-adrenal activity. Catecholamine responses were physiological higher in young adults and males. In other populations, catecholamine responses and resting catecholamine production were higher in male athletes than in non-athletes. Catecholamine responses to stress and its sensitivity were enhanced in the presence of androgens, and catecholamine expressions in young male athletes were already high at baseline, were higher following vaccination, and were higher than those in non-vaccinated athletes. So the epidemiological, autopsy, molecular, and physiological findings unanimously and strongly suggest that a hypercatecholaminergic state is the critical trigger of the rare cases of myocarditis due to components from SARS-CoV-2 potentially increasing sudden death among elite male athletes. So this high level of these other attributes would trigger the myocarditis in these, good athletes. I'll just flip then to the conclusion on page 9 of 11. The epidemiological findings of SARS-CoV-2 mRNA vaccine-induced myocarditis, which is overrepresented in young males, and the preliminary reports of an increase in sudden death, particularly in athletes, while absent after COVID-19 infection, present highly concordant molecular justifications for the physiological differences in anatomopathological findings and catecholamine activity, which is more intense in active young males. We may conclude that, supported by biological, clinical, and epidemiological findings, enhanced catecholamine activity or hypercatecholaminergic state provides sufficient evidence for the highly plausible catecholamine theory of SARS-CoV-2 mRNA or spike protein mediated myocardial complications to be considered a strong hypothesis. So there's anytime there's a side effect or some sort of disease or some problem, you always wonder what is the mechanism behind that. And, you don't want to jump to or make a false presumption or conclusion without due evidence and understanding the mechanistic explanation of why this may have occurred. And so this particular paper presents a compelling evidence for why this happens in, myocarditis occurs in certain young individuals. So interesting information. There's probably updates to that and probably some further studies. There are probably also articles that reference this because this is a fairly well-researched thing. So this might be another good way of finding similar articles would be to search on this and see what other articles reference this article as a foundation for further research. Before I proceed to our last of 7 articles, is there any comments on this?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have one thought.
Yes.
I'm going to throw this out there, though. I don't necessarily want to volunteer for it. I think if I could be as bold as to say it, you've been in the industry for quite a while. So you may be the best person, or maybe any of my esteemed colleagues that weren't able to make it today. I think it might be helpful if we were to also put a link out there with our committee. I know we're putting links to all of these articles, maybe certain pertinent definitions for some of these medical terms. I think if we could really break them down just to very basic terms would be helpful for the public in general.
Thank you for that suggestion. I would invite the committee to start capturing those terms, and we will work on including a glossary with the final report and maybe even as an independent document at the webpage for the special committee. So that's a great suggestion. I think these are difficult at times to understand, and they use a lot of terms, and you have to kind of understand the roots. So, when we say myocarditis, itis is inflammation, card is heart, and I forget what myo stands for. Forgive me, but understanding those terms is very important to understanding the general discussion. And they're really not that hard to understand once you kind of understand the code. If I may, for take a moment of personal privilege, my dad studied Latin, and when he was, I guess, would have been in his late 30s or early 40s, he was playing badminton with someone who was an outstanding tennis player. I remember it correctly, it was Ron Hutchins. And he got hit in the eye with a volleyball, or not volleyball,
The
Bird.
bird,
birdie,
yeah,
yeah.
the birdie. So, and my mom insisted that he go into the doctor the following Monday. So he went into the doctor, and the doctor said, in Latin, you have blood in your eye. And my dad, who spoke Latin, said, I know I've got blood in my eye. What is there something wrong? He didn't need another way. It was funny. So anyway, I remember that. Thank you for reminding me of that story. But I think it emphasizes your point. Part of the homework, the way to be independently responsible for these types of things is to start to be able to speak this language and to understand the language that people are using to describe these things. And I think the glossary would be a great addition to what we're preparing to do. So thank you for that suggestion. All right. And I know my able clerk will capture all these suggestions. So thank you, Representative DeRoy. All right, last one is just, this is more kind of general side effects, this article. And so just want to read this last one. This is from, let's see if I can, it is from Viruses, the magazine Viruses, from 2023. Looks to be volume 15 and 1045. I'm not sure what those designations are, but and this title of this article is Molecular Mimicry of the Viral Spike in the SARS-CoV-2 Vaccine Possibly Triggers Transient Dysregulation, so of ACE2, leading to vascular and coagulation dysfunction similar to SARS-CoV-2 infection. So, you may have heard of ACE2 inhibitors, right? So that population should be fairly. So this ACE2 is what they're talking about. It's been a while since I've looked at what ACE2 inhibitors do, but again, I have to probably read up on that. So let me just read the abstract for this, so the benefits of SARS-CoV-2 spike mRNA vaccines are well known, including a significant decline in COVID-19 morbidity, a decrease in mortality rate of the SARS-CoV-2 infected persons. This was written in 23, so I would expect such a statement from that. However, pharmacovigilance studies have revealed the existence of rare cases of cardiovascular complications after mass vaccination using such formulations. Cases of high blood pressure have also been reported, but were rarely documented under perfectly controlled medical supervision. The press release of these warning signals triggered a huge debate over COVID-19 vaccine safety. Thereby, our attention was quickly focused on issues involving the risk of myocarditis, acute coronary syndrome, hypertension, and thrombosis. So, those type of heart-related issues. Rare cases of undesirable post-vaccine pathophysiological phenomena should question us, especially when they occur in young subjects. They are more likely to occur with any inappropriate use of the mRNA vaccine. That is, at a time, or for example, at a time when the immune response is already very active during a low noise infection in the process of healing. So if someone were to get, just to kind of translate that a little bit or paraphrase it, if someone were to get the COVID virus and be in the process of recovering from that and then getting an mRNA vaccine, that could have some issues. So leading to angiotensin II, Ang2, induced inflammation triggering tissue damage. Such harmful effects observed after the COVID-19 vaccine evoke a possible molecular mimicry of the viral spike, transiently dysregulating the ACE2 function, the angiotensin converting enzyme 2 ACE2 function. Although the benefit-risk ratio of SARS-CoV-2 spike mRNA vaccine is very favorable, again, this is reported as of 2023, so it did not take into account some of the recent evidence on cancer and other things like that. So it seems reasonable to suggest medical surveillance to patients with a history of cardiovascular disease who received the COVID-19 vaccine. I'm reminded, so ACE2, I believe, is a blood pressure medicine. So it's been a while since I studied it, so had not remembered that right offhand, but then the article itself referenced that. I don't see, unless there's I don't see any particular conclusion section within this article. So, but again, I think it's worth reading, and there's a lot of things to study here. So, I think we have already some substantial things to support your proposed letter, Representative Polozov. I think we do need to do some research on the demographics in the first paragraph, the questions about the efficacy in preventing transmission, and I think the next two paragraphs about SAEs could be, there could be some more details provided there, maybe. And we've got some on the myocarditis in these last two articles we've written. It would be good to try and take a deeper dive as well and see if there are some more specific articles that have come out more recently that have more definitive and conclusive results. I do think we have enough articles to substantiate the cancer aspect, and that was sort of what I focused on in my research. And I think this paragraph about the different institutions and stakeholders in the healthcare industry, if not done earlier, we should make a note in that paragraph regarding the suppression of data. Since regulatory agencies are mentioned there, we should note that. I'd like to, I have a couple more items that I'd like to discuss amongst the committee, but before I proceed, is there anything? Yes, Representative Polozov.
Just another thought on South Korea article. It would be, maybe for future, it would be interesting to compare like different cancerogenic factors. For example, it does say, for example, for prostate cancer that hazard ratio is approximately 1.7. And it's in the first significant increase at 1 year post-vaccination. So I wonder how it's compared to other harmful chemicals, for example, or some other medications that can have cancer side effects. Because if I remember correctly, like for example, if you smoke, you probably won't have cancer in your first year after you smoked. Maybe it will take like 20 years, 50 years. I don't know. So the fact that we are seeing that effect in 1 year post-vaccination and numbers are similarly high for me, but I don't know how it's compared to other chemicals that we are exposed, like smoke or like I don't know what else can cause cancer, like different food, like if you eat I don't know some conserved meat, like it might increase your chance of cancer, but I don't know if it actually happens at 1 year post consumption of some canned food. So just a thought, maybe definitely not for next week, but just to put in perspective for constituents, are those numbers concerning? How they're comparable to other factors, and especially that New Hampshire already has one of the highest or highest, like pretty high child cancer rate in New Hampshire. So obviously, I think New Hampshire is pretty high on pediatric cancers. So definitely it could be, I don't know, from granite radiation, from all kind of factors, genetic, but to put this in perspective would be beneficial.
Thank you for that suggestion. It's an excellent suggestion that that sort of lag time to manifestation is good. Um, on a kind of tangential thought, we note that there are some nations, for example, Sweden, that basically did no vaccines, but really sought to increase the level of vitamin D, and I would say, notoriously the Northeast, and even more specifically, northern New England is known for vitamin D deficiencies, and vitamin D is, of course, very important for immunological health, and so it's funny. Relative of mine mentioned that the doctor will not even test for vitamin D because they already know that they're deficient, just from living in northern New England, and so the presumption is that people are already deficient. So, and there are studies coming out where vitamin D as a treatment has been evaluated. So that's something else to consider. As well as C, yes. So, yes, Representative Litchfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing that I would love to see addressed, if we could collectively discuss it at the point that we're about to present this letter. I understand that the point of the letter is basically probably it's not appropriate at this point in time to recommend the mRNA vaccine, the COVID vaccine or SARS vaccine for children ages 8 months to 2 years. But one thing in this last magazine article that you presented to us, medical study, it was in the viruses article. It mentioned here when it was talking about young subjects and issues occurring. It was in the middle of the abstract. It mentioned, quote unquote, they are more likely to occur with inappropriate use of mRNA vaccine. Example, at the time when the immune response is already very active during a low noise infection in the process of healing. One what I wanted to bring up was the fact that I know in the interest of, or this is what I've heard over the past 20 years, 25 years, in the interest of keeping children or the youth on target with the vaccine schedule, when they appear before the pediatrician, even if they are ill, they are given a vaccine as long as they do not have a temperature. So as long as they do not have a fever, and I would say this would have to be verified, but I believe these days the threshold is 101. But as long as they do not have a fever, it is still recommended, regardless of what the vaccination is or multiple vaccinations, that they still receive that vaccination. So understand the goal of the letter is no, we're not recommending that vaccination, but my concern is if someone were to decide to move forward with it, it concerns me if they were to actually give that vaccine with a child who presents with symptoms of illness at that time, regardless of whether or not they have a fever.
That's a very interesting point. I think that I I think that that is an aspect that we could certainly bring into the full report because the timing of the administration of a vaccine, um, our goal is to ultimately gather data to allow the state to respond very responsibly and provide, um, at least as far as vaccines are concerned, the best level of informed consent that we can so that patients or guardians of children, as the case may be, can determine what their appropriate risk benefit ratio is. And if that is something that is a recommendation, it's a good and interesting recommendation that we should be making to the Department of Health and Human Services regarding the mandated vaccine schedule. And so, but specifically for the administration of COVID vaccines, I think that that could be made, and then specifically for the report, and there could be a footnote or endnote stating that this needs to be further looked at within regulatory agencies within New Hampshire to better understand this issue. So I think it is relevant and germane. We just need to make sure that the scope of the report directly assesses COVID-19, but that we also can certainly footnote it or endnote it to make sure that as a factor to consider how we can best help the constituents of New Hampshire, if that may be a causal factor for children, we certainly want to note that, and we could make a request subsequently to ask the Department of Health and Human Services to look into that within New Hampshire, if nothing else, and then it would be up to them to investigate that. But that's a great suggestion. Representative Polozov.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah. Thank you for this suggestion. At the end of the abstract, they also suggest medical surveillance to patients with a history of cardiovascular diseases who received the COVID-19 vaccine. And in the article itself, they talk about male athletes who already have very specific profile and already some stress for their heart muscles that make them similarly more vulnerable to this side effect. And that reminds me of other problems that we discussed on our first meeting. I remember visiting here in Concord, New Hampshire Technical Institute, and those very inspiring young leaders who learn there, and one of their focus is on medical students. They also have very good focus on their physical activity, but we have situation when if they need to have medical practice in hospitals for their education, the hospitals unfortunately use it to demand COVID vaccine for New Hampshire medical students who are not their staff. So we have exactly this situation when young people, including young males, are required to take this shot. It, of course, you can say the adults they can they can research. They unlike 2-year-old kids, 2-year-old kid cannot refuse the shot or have a say. Adults can say. But what choice we are giving them? If they know this data and they don't want it to themselves, the only option for them is not to become medical professional. So it's another problem here in New Hampshire, and our New Hampshire Hospital Association should do better, but it's it's probably another letter or another point in our final report. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Uh, in my early 20s, I ran marathons, and I ran 4 marathons. My best was a 3:09, which is not world class, but it's very good. I shudder to think if I had had a COVID-19 vaccine at that time, whether I would be here with you today, because I had all the conditions that they're describing that would have fed into a myocarditis incident. And so, and quite back then, I would have quite willingly taken the vaccine. So, all right. Any other further discussion or comments based on any of these 7 articles that we've looked at thus far? All right. I'd like to just bring up a couple of other points. I think last meeting, Representative Litchfield, you asked whether or not, I believe it was you, asked whether or not the CDC results created a false positive or a false negative, and which was more predominant. So we last time we met, we discussed the fact that the CDC had a number of problems with it, in that they were releasing a COVID test with a 33% error rate. I have found some articles related to that. I did not have time to read them sufficiently that I felt comfortable presenting them, but I will do that in the future. But at this point, it seems as if they're false positives. So people were tested and presumed to have the virus when they may not have, and so just to answer that question, I think the kind of the conclusion is it's false positives. I do want to get the specific details so that we have that as part of our consideration as well, because I think that feeds into that whole aspect of can New Hampshire agencies trust the federal agencies question. All right, then I'd like to just move in briefly to last time we introduced the U.S. Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations interim report. it was entitled Unmasked How Biden Health Officials Purposely Turned a Blind Eye Toward COVID-19 Vaccine Safety Signals. I don't want to talk about this further at this point, but just to say that in doing further research, I had not heard of this committee specifically looking at COVID before, but they actually go back quite a few years. So there are actually other reports that this committee has issued, and so I just wanted to alert the committee to that fact, and that I will be um, looking to get additional reports that were generated by this committee or subcommittee, permanent subcommittee on investigations, and we'll also be presenting those to the this special committee in the future. Probably, time permitting, I might just introduce them, and then we can discuss them more at a subsequent meeting. But I wanted to make people aware of them because I for one, was not aware that this subcommittee was doing these investigations, and was not aware that other reports had been generated, and therefore there's very good information in here, and I think we should, as part of our special committee efforts, should try to incorporate this and also incorporate both sides. This is a majority staff interim report. There are also statements from the minority that we should include. We want to take a as open and transparent look at this as possible, and allow, this will allow us to make our conclusions. The minority can make separate and different conclusions if they feel that that's warranted, and then ultimately we can let our constituents decide what it is that they want to do with that information. So I think that's the best way to be both impartial and transparent and open-minded to handling this data. So look forward to presenting that in the future. And then the final thing is just, I do think over the next couple of meetings, I would like to identify people within the agencies as well as maybe other speakers who might come forward in September and October to talk with us. I honestly didn't feel it was necessary to rush people in here, knowing that we would ostensibly meet again in September and October. So I'd like to kind of schedule those. And so I just wanted to bring that to the special committee, and please think about who we would want to call in, and how we would go about contacting those specific people. The last subcommittee had some people outside the state, several agency officials, but several people outside the state. So I think we want to look to kind of have that same sort of mix. We want other people to come in within the state and tell us what they've learned in the interim. And we want people outside the state that if they have some other perspectives that can be shared with us, that would be good as well. Any other comments? All right, Representative Polozov.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will do additional research, but from preliminary research I've just done. So New Hampshire DHHS has a page about vaccine schedule where it now states on their website that they follow AAP schedule, and then they have a link to know the details, and that link goes to AAP website, and they're like number one is on their schedule is COVID-19 vaccine. So I will look more into it and look where it says that it's for kids under 2, if it does say so, or how it's established. But I was able to confirm that's how New Hampshire DHHS official website currently communicate the state position on vaccine schedule.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for that. That's good. Well, those will be important footnotes to include in the letter and in our subsequent report. Thank you for that. Representative Litchfield.
Thank you. One thing I think that would be interesting to find out is nowadays we've been hearing more and more as far as caregivers, grandparents, etc., being around infants. They're recommending that they have a DTaP booster, right, for this to slow the spread or stop the spread of pertussis, whooping cough. I'm just curious if the COVID-19 vaccination is being recommended for these infants in an effort to protect the elderly population. That would be interesting to find out. Just a thought.
I think that's an excellent thought. Certainly, we heard similar statements during the pandemic. So I think it would be good to know if that assumption and that paradigm is still active in the recommendations. Representative Polozov, when you're looking up those sources, could you see whether or not if that paradigm is evident? Thank you. Thank you for that suggestion. Let me go one more time. Representative Litchfield, any comments? Representative DeRoy. All right. Representative Polozov.
All set. Thank you.
All right. Well, with that, thank you all for attending here today, and thank you for any listeners who listened to our special committee. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Address that to the special House Special Committee on COVID Efficacy. I think you can find that general email on our webpage. We would be happy to try and address COVID-related questions if you have such. And if any member of the public would like to come and testify before us, our next meetings are next Wednesday, which would be the 17th. And then we'll also have a meeting on Wednesday, the 24th. And so those will be our next meetings, and we will plan to meet then. Those will be our final 2 meetings in June, and we will not be meeting in either August or in July or August. The New Hampshire government tries to step back a little bit and take that time off. But we will be diligently working behind the scenes, trying to do our own individual research and to try and prepare for the fall. We will resume in September, and as I said earlier, we'll maybe at our last meeting we'll talk about some possible September dates that we would start after Labor Day, and we'll try and decide which would be the best time to meet in September for that. And we may, as I said, because of my own work schedule, I still am employed, and so sometimes have obligations and know of some obligations I already have in September. So we'll try and make some arrangements around those. So with that, I will adjourn today's meeting, and thank you all very much.